We've been living in this new normal for about 6 weeks now. Well, I'm having a different experience. I don't live within the temples of society's normal. So from my place of wisdom, I know that some of you are falling prey to the New-Normalcy Fallacy. Here is a clip of the former White House doctor, Ronnie Jackson. Here he puts our minds at ease that the White House has always had things under control from the beginning. Watch this clip from the early days of the outbreak.
The president has taken even more unprecedented steps. Your reaction, big picture, bring in your medical expertise and tell people what they need to know.
Well, I can tell you, Sean, just to start with, you're right. This is not the first time that we've been tested with something like this. And I watched the president tonight, and I'll tell you, that's what leadership looks like. And the president, his leadership on this didn't start when we found out about this. We've had a robust pandemic planning team in place since his administration started.
The words you read, the songs you sing. Need to wonder how or why. Hold the rest are proudly high in hand. We are the priests of the temples.
Maybe things are going to be okay. They're doing press conferences almost every day. They seem to be on top of some things. There's a lot of options for cures. And most of the people who've died are just mostly old people and unhealthy people who don't get enough fat-soluble vitamins, and people who eat refined grains and stuff with the anti-nutrients in it. So maybe we should be proud to hold the Red Star.
Tyson closed its largest pork plant in the small town of Waterloo, Iowa yesterday. There are now 380 confirmed cases in that town, mostly related to the Tyson plant.
But is this true? Or is this just temporary? What's the future going to hold here for the meat? Let's go back to the White House doctor for a second here, because things sounded okay before.
We've had a robust pandemic planning team in place since...
Oh, crap. Attention all people of planet Earth. Prepare for meat shortage. I repeat, prepare for meat shortage.
We've had a robust pandemic planning team in place since...
Actually, Trump cut funding to that. Like, he cut almost everything. This guy, a real doctor, for some reason, he and so many other people have just decided to sell their souls to Donald Trump for some reason, and just lie to the American people while they are dying.
National security staff, we've had infectious disease experts and other physicians that are on that team. And as soon as something comes up like this new novel coronavirus, everything goes into action on what we're going to do for this. And the president's been quick, he's been decisive, he's reacted appropriately according to what the situation dictated, and he has saved lives in this country, and he has kept the spread of this from getting out of control.
We never have witnessed a quarantine this quickly. I don't think we could ever really calculate in any way how many people probably did not get the virus as a result of those quick actions.
Wow, my head is spinning. Check out this message from Diet Carburetor. And there's another thing suspicious about this Ronnie Jackson. Well, he didn't just go on the news. Well, he didn't go on the news at all. He went on one of the worst, blatantly biased fake news show on Fox News. A legitimate person knows not to go on Fox, unless they're trying to get votes, like Tulsi Gabbard. But he's a doctor. Kind of like how those other doctors, they all went on Fox when they had something crazy to say. Gross, ass-servicing performance. Not even hiding it.
Mayor of Waterloo is now accusing Tyson of closing the plant too late. CNN's Gary Tuckman joins me now. That Tyson's plant decided to close, but only after being urged to close by the health board. Is that right?
That's right, Jake, and this is a very upsetting, nerve-wracking time here.
Oh, this just reminds me, as this video idea has sat on my schedule for the last 10 days, the news keeps changing every day. I keep adding new stuff to this video. And now just yesterday, something to add here to this story. President Trump has he signed an executive order that would override the governors, who would not have any control over whether the meat packing plants stay open or not. Governors won't be able to shut them down. So the meat industry has been saved for now. So finally, Trump has enacted some socialism that will help the average person, the average meat eater. So hopefully carnivores won't have to worry after all.
Not only for the people who work in this huge pork processing plant, but for their families, for this community of Waterloo, Iowa, because the cases in this county have spiked, and a lot of it is because of this plant. About 2,800 people work here, 182 positive COVID cases, but that is a very low number because most of the people have not been tested yet. People here have been asking for days and weeks for the governor to close this. She did not close it, and Tyson decided yesterday. I want to give you a look at what one employee told me about what he said to his company when he made a phone call last week. So you called HR, and you said what?
I was concerned about the coronavirus being in the plant, and I was scared for me and my family.
And what did HR say to you?
They told me I was safe, and they told me that everything was okay, and they told me I'll have a better chance of catching the coronavirus going out to Walmart than in Tyson. Come to work, you safe.
Well, he's screwed.
Hold the rest are proudly high in hand.
First, a quick primer on what is normalcy bias. Normalcy bias is a cognitive bias which leads people to disbelieve or minimize threat warnings. Individuals will underestimate the likelihood of a disaster when it might affect them and its potential adverse effects. The normalcy bias causes many people to not adequately prepare for natural disasters, pandemics. Oh, that's interesting that word is in here. And calamities caused by human error. Yep, a lot of error to go around. Like Trump is blaming China for the fact that they let it spread across their country, and then it came here, but then the U.S. let it spread across all of their 50 states. So Trump made the same errors that China did. Okay, about 70% of people reportedly display normalcy bias during a disaster. I would say almost 100% display it before the disaster. I think it's in our nature. The way I see normalcy bias is simply that people get used to their day-to-day life and perceive it as normal. They get so used to it, they don't think anything will deviate from that norm. Then, when deviations to the norm come up, they have a problem elevating from the norm. Normalcy bias has also been called analysis paralysis. It's related, the ostrich effect, and by first responders, the negative panic. The opposite of normalcy bias is overreaction, or worst case scenario bias. I used to have that, I think. Maybe that's common when you're young, to think the worst thing will happen, in which small deviations from normalcy are dealt with as signals of an impending catastrophe. Oh yeah, anything different that happens, and you think it's the end of the world? Yeah. There's a book called Who Survives When Disaster Strikes and Why? There's 3 phases of response: denial, deliberation, and the decisive moment. Denial. People were likely to deny that a disaster was happening. Oh, that makes me think of back in January. A lot of people didn't want to believe what could happen because it was hard to foresee what was going to happen. If back in January you could go into the future and see today's news, you'd be in disbelief. Never seen this before. And we just never would have believed this was going to be the news 3 months earlier. But if you're a pandemic expert, you are trained to foresee this and can see it coming. Or if you're wise or older, you know that things that have never happened before can happen. But because we all didn't jump from January to April, and we saw it all play out, we've now become used to this new normal. And now we think that this is going to be the way it'll continue to go. We had some panic buying, but then the stores restocked. But that doesn't mean it'll continue to go like that. Okay, I'm sticking this in here And this is after I'd just finished the video, and then I went to turn on the TV. After like 7 hours away, I don't even recognize what's going on. But this fits in perfectly with this video because look how fast things changed. The Michigan state capitol was invaded by a militia today. These are pictures from, well, it's yesterday now, April 30th. An armed militia. Now, considering the look of these people, they might be this upset, partly because of the shutdown of all the meat factories, and thinking there might be a meat shortage. Now, this brings new meaning to that term I made up many months back, the meat militia. I was only half joking, and now look. My instincts have been very in tune. Things are continuing to change, more people dead, more people sick, and even if there wasn't a shutdown, you'd have so many sick people, sick workers, and sick customers that you'd still have a similar problem with the economy. And now there's some states that want to reopen, and there's still a lot of people out there that don't believe any of this, or that don't think they'll get sick. And all that is going to have an effect, a big effect on the future. We're already starting to see some breaking down of the food system. Here's a piece of an article. Even as some grocery store aisles are empty, some agricultural businesses are resorting to spilling or throwing away huge quantities of food. Some $5 billion of fresh fruits and vegetables have already gone to waste. Some dairies have been pouring thousands of gallons of milk down the drain. The reason is that the country's supply chains are set for normal times. There's the word normal. When people get a significant amount of food from restaurants, see, restaurants are no longer in operation at full capacity at least. So that avenue in the food chain is no longer operating. And it was set up to operate that way. And they can't just shift easily. More people are going to be buying food at grocery stores now. So they have to change everything they're doing. Get the food going to the stores instead of restaurants. And also many kids eat at school, but they're no longer going to school. So that chain is broken too. And all this has to be reworked in the middle of all this chaos, and it has to be done by people who have to be social distancing, the people who aren't already sick and dead. See, if you throw enough unknowns, variables, and chaos into the mix, there's no telling what can happen. Some people just didn't want to think the worst. And certainly the president didn't. He has a political motivation to not want people thinking about pandemics and going into hiding. It takes time for the brain to process information and get used to the new normal and recognize that a disaster is a threat. Yep, people have never died before. Oh, and I was thinking just yesterday, this is the new normalcy. And if this were to just fade away, then people would just go back to, okay, everything's fine now. Or we're back to the old normal. Well, the old normal was not normal. And now we have one more reason to realize the president we have is a threat. 60,000 people. What makes you think we'll go back to normal and this won't happen again? And here I am talking about nuclear war. And some people will say, well, it's never happened before. That's not going to happen. That's too out of the norm. Well, so was a pandemic, where we now have 1 million Americans who have it. And that's just what we know of. Second phase is deliberation, where you have to make a decision, which will be harder to do if you weren't prepared for it. You'll get tunnel vision, reduced motor skills. Then comes the third phase, where you have to take action. Failure to do so can result in injury or death. Now, we've seen a lot of people in the U.S. who are not acting quick enough. And you had to be real quick here, because as I've been saying all these weeks, the virus is ahead of us. And then there's times where, like in a car accident, where you have to take action really quick. And sometimes your brain will just freeze. When something unusual happens, I've had this experience. It was so unusual that my mind didn't really believe, I guess, that it was happening. I would say that in order to prevent your brain from just pausing, you have to prepare yourself mentally to realize that anything could happen at any time. And in 2020, that's more likely than ever. Speaking of things that are unlikely, this year so far, well, some people say World War III almost started. Australia was on fire, I remember that. Kobe Bryant did die. Sports are just canceled. No one saw that coming. No one could have predicted that one. Millions sick. Whole world in lockdown. I don't know who that is, or Gronk. And yeah, if you told someone 4 months ago that Kim Jong-un and Boris Johnson came close to dying, they'd find that hard to believe. Oh, but wait, did you hear about the UFOs in the video that the Pentagon just released? You can expect the worst things to happen. I'm actually expecting Joe Biden to make the worst mistake for vice president pick. That Abrams, who believes all women, which means she doesn't believe men. Oh, unless it's Biden. Oh, it's so irritating. But that's a different story.
Our friend Gary High Fruit. He's all over the place.
It's no longer people could get killed. It's actually happening now. Just be prepared to expect anything and to take action right away. Believe it when you see it. Like I've been telling people for years, Trump is he's a sociopath. You can look that up, which I did in a live video. But he's crazy and really dumb. Believe it when you see it. It's right there on the screen. We can't have a president like that. So when something really unusual happens right in front of you, where you might need to take action, believe it and take the action right away. When I was in the store a couple days ago, I assumed that the virus is everywhere because you don't know. And you would need to think that way in order to avoid getting infected. So you can see how this fits into a food shortage. Yeah. All the great societies of history are all now gone. What happened to them? Nothing lasts forever. Eventually things fall apart. Matter of fact, it was often they were so complacent, thinking that they were safe, because their society was so great and powerful. The Americans have this idea that no one's going to invade America. Well, they might not invade the traditional way, and in fact, they aren't. It's already happened. Like China invades us by hacking our computers. The Mideast invaded us by infiltrating into our society and then hijacking planes. And Russia has been for years invading our election system and using social media to put out false information, stir up trouble amongst us and divide us. And now we got this crisis going on. So I'm surprised that a foreign country or terrorist group has not attacked us. And just because they haven't in the last 2 months this has been going on, don't think it won't happen tomorrow. That's the fallacy, to think that it won't happen just because it hasn't happened. Remember, it is still kind of early in this pandemic, and things are only going to get worse. So they probably should wait. Examples of the normalcy fallacy. Car crashes occur very frequently, but the average individual experiences them only rarely, if ever. When people are asked to leave in anticipation of a disaster, most check with 4 or more sources of information before deciding what to do. The normalcy bias explains why, when the volcano Vesuvius erupted, the residents watched for hours without evacuating. It explains why thousands of people refused to leave New Orleans, and all down there in the south. As Hurricane Katrina approached, I remember this. I remember watching cable news and reporters interviewing people on the street, like in bars, and saying, "Oh, I think I'll be okay. I always have been before. I'll be in this bar drinking. I'll just come out when the storm is past." Yeah, for them, they've experienced a lot of hurricanes. They get used to that as normal, that there's hurricanes that they survive. Convinced that a multiple reactor meltdown could never occur. And of course, there's going to be a lot more examples. You could go on forever. By coincidence, just as I'm starting to make this video, I just had a talk with one of my in-laws, or that guy who was driving the truck. I've mentioned before that insanity runs in his family, as does being obese, but he was just talking about his son, who's over 300 pounds. And so he started telling me about how he thinks that he's safe from the virus because he prays to God. And I guess he was saying the proof of that is that he doesn't have the virus after all this time. Well, I'm telling you about him. You can look at this picture. This is the closest thing I've got to him. Completely oblivious. He thinks that God will protect him. First thought that normal people like us would have is, why would you think that in the face of everything that goes on in the world? His father says he watches Fox News. Therefore, he doesn't get all the information. Maybe he hasn't heard of all the Christians who have died in the churches. Plenty of them caught the virus. And his father said he would probably say that those were not true believers. And again, I'm saying, but that is a fallacy. That with people like this, whenever they come across information that doesn't fit what they believe in, or maybe what they want to believe in, or are told to believe in, they make an excuse to marginalize it. And the fact that they do that with everything that doesn't fit clearly shows that they have a clear bias. And when someone is biased, they will always end up believing in things that are not true because of that bias. Now, understanding that takes a little bit of brain work and more time to really get it into your head. And school clearly doesn't do this for people. This makes me think of Darwin's principle, survival of the fittest, or smartest. That principle keeps the world going. The fittest animals survive. That's the reason why the species lives on. And then you got to wonder, you would think all these fundamental religious people would have died out, just being too dumb to survive. How can you survive when they don't understand the basics of how the world works? That if you do certain dangerous things, you could be injured or killed. If you don't believe that, you're going to be injured or killed eventually. So how do we have a world full of religious people who believe fallacies? Well, one thing is, we don't live in a natural world where they would just get themselves killed. We live in societies where these people are protected from killing themselves. For instance, the conversation came out of the fact that he didn't like being quarantined, couldn't see his father. People are being forced to keep away from him, and that protects him. So he probably won't get the virus, but he will never get that. Maybe someone should tell him about the upcoming meat shortage.